The Islamic courts had built alliances with Eritrea, with internal groups, insurgent groups within Ethiopia, the Oromo Liberation Front, the Ogaden National Liberation Front, and to the extent that those forces were being allowed to work from Islamic court-controlled areas to increase their ability to engage in cross-border attacks on Ethiopia, required or drove Ethiopia to engage in this preemptive strike.
May I
please,
respond to that?
Please, absolutely.
I'm going to respond to that.
Please.
I feel that the war was essentially ideological and geopolitical. Ideological because we could see very clearly that the Islamic courts were headed by a group led by Sheikh Awais who were extremists. And they had two goals. One was Greater Somalia, and the other was a radical extremist Islamic State in the Horn. And as the money began to flow in, they controlled the money. They controlled the arms, and the arms were piling in and becoming more and more sophisticated. And of course, you had some foreign fighters as well. That was an ideological battle. Their idea was a base in Somalia. A base in Somalia, if at all possible, that would include Somaliland, parts of Ethiopia, Djibouti, and Kenya, as we know. So I would say, first and foremost, this was an ideological war, and that's why I would say it was the greatest threat that the West faced in Africa at that time. Not Darfur, which is a humanitarian tragedy, but a geopolitical, ideological tragedy for us would have been Somalia. The second was the geopolitical, and that was the Greater Somalia. Now, I can agree that Eritrea plays into that, because Eritrea was working on making this opportunity in Somalia turn into regime change or a split up of Ethiopia. They were infiltrating into Somalia, the Oromo Liberation Front. They were working with the Ogaden Liberation Front. Clearly, Eritrea, having not been able to succeed on the border, saw this as a target of opportunity. But I think the reasons for the war were not Eritrea's seizing an opportunity, but the fact that you had radical Islamists who wanted to take over Somalia as a base for spreading their views throughout Somalia and the Horn.
But we should have a diplomatic attack as well, and that's where I'd like to focus my attention here. We should target al-Shabaab's outside source of support. The government of Eritrea's support for al-Shabaab is well documented. Assistant Secretary for African Affairs Johnny Carson testified to Congress about Eritrea's supply of weapons to terrorists inside Somalia. The UN Security Council, acting at the urging of African neighbors, passed sanctions against Eritrea, demanding that the country, and I'm going to read from the sanctions here, cease arming, cease training, and equipping al-Shabaab. With al-Shabaab under pressure, it's time to tackle its state sponsors, its state supporters, before this menace reaches the United States. We must have